disagree that anyone here today is being resistant to hiring veterans. I find that everyone I talk to out there, of course, has great respect for what veterans have done for their country and wants every one of them to be employed. And I disagree with the previous statements that are to the contrary. Ms. Hsu, the question I have, and I'm concerned about the Americans with Disabilities Act. Do you think an employer should ask a woman when she comes to be employed whether or not she plans to have a family or not?
No.
Okay. Do you think that there are some people out there who are employers that may consider that a potential, having a potential impact on their future employment of that individual?
Perhaps.
Okay, then why do you think that it is okay for businesses now to ask people if they have a disability or not?
Because the ADA says so.
They can ask. You can ask people. I ran a medical practice that had 100 employees and 15 physicians, and I can tell you that those type of questions in the initial pre-offer stage were not the type of things that we would ask. Why? Because it violates the law.
If it's in furtherance of affirmative action, sir, then they are permissible questions.
Yeah, I think you're talking out of both sides of your mouth on this issue. I'll be frankly honest with you, because I have serious concerns about, on one hand, saying that people are allowed to have people voluntarily say whether they have a disability, but on the other hand saying that, well, that it depends on the circumstance, that could be a violation of the law. I do think it leaves employers wide open to individual lawsuits. As a previous employer, and I can tell you that my wife, I have 4 children, my wife's a working mother, she's an anesthesiologist. I have direct experience with this, and I don't think that employers should be able to ask women whether they plan to have a family or not. I think it should be a violation of the law because it's discriminatory potentially. So I have serious concerns about what you said today about accepting the fact that now, because you want to set a quota, the only way to do a quota is to have people self-determine whether or not they have a disability so that you can use that to establish a quota. That's the issue I have, because I think personally it leaves people open to violation of the law. And I just think that's a serious problem. And I think your intent I'm not talking about your intent or your motivation. I'm just thinking, particularly based on the law, that you're changing precedent where now people, so say what happens, an employer comes in and they ask someone that has a disability and the person says, I refuse to answer that question.
That's a perfectly appropriate answer.
Right? And so say that person is someone who was told to go in to a particular employer because they knew they were going to get asked that question, and when they walked out of the room, their attorney filed a lawsuit saying that they were discriminated against because the employer didn't say they didn't get the job. And the employer says, you didn't get the job because you don't have the requirements. They say it's because they refused to answer whether they have a disability or not. Would that be a violation would that be a lawsuit that would be something you would agree with, that they could do that?
It's certainly not a lawsuit I would have taken as a plaintiff's lawyer.
Why not?
Because you have to have proof that there was an intent to discriminate against someone solely because of their disability.
Well, if somebody comes in and you ask them the question and as it turns out, they say they do have a disability, but they refuse to answer the question.
Just because a pregnant woman applies for a job doesn't mean that if she doesn't get the job, it's because she was pregnant. I mean, there's an analysis that has to go, and I'd find that to be very thin on the facts and the law, sir.
Yeah, well, I find your testimony to be very thin on the facts also. Mr. Kirshner, I want to ask you a question. Your testimony states that over 3,300 hospitals and clinics provide coverage to almost 10 million TRICARE beneficiaries, that an expansion of OFCCP's jurisdiction to classify these hospitals as a federal subcontractor will cover almost 60% of the registered hospitals in the United States. If OFCCP is successful in its assertion of jurisdiction over hospitals, how do you expect this potentially will affect the care for our nation's service members and veterans?
Well, each hospital would need to make its own decision, but what the DoD has already found in a published report is that hospitals are becoming more resistant to signing up to participate in TRICARE programs out of a concern that they could, after the fact, be found to be federal contractors.
So what you're saying is it's going to limit access to health care, because I was a heart surgeon before. I know about health care. What you're going to say is maybe a lot of community hospitals and smaller communities just aren't going to mess with it.
Correct. If they're not otherwise federal contractors, and therefore just participating in TRICARE or FEHBP would cause them to, by performing that medical care, become federal contractors, hospitals could make a decision to say, I don't want that burden, that administrative burden, and so therefore we're not going to provide care for either service members or for federal employees and their families.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.